Yeah.
Yeah,
It's time.
it is time.
You're going to.
I'll watch the time.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Manet session at IETF115. I think we have a bit less people in the room or online than last time, but then we had a combined session with Roel and Babel. And now a couple of our strongest supporters are in the drip session as well. This is the notewell. You should be familiar with this. If not, quickly go read it. It is important. You may have seen this earlier this week, but the mask wearing part is most important. So unless you're actively speaking at the microphone, wear your mask. So even if you're passively speaking at the microphone, you should also wear your mask. These are general resources. You've probably seen that. And specifically for this Manet session, well, you probably have seen that as well. It would be good if there was someone or several persons in the room that could use a notepad to make some notes. This is our agenda. It has been updated today because yesterday I got the offer by Sarah to present on DTN management architecture. As you may remember, Ed Burain presented this in the online meeting IETF 112, and since then there have been some updates to this DTMA, and I still think this could also have use for the Manet working group. So the updates are going to be presented by Sarah. At the end, we will have a rechartering discussion that I should have discussed with our ID before, but I did not, so apologies for that. So he's coming in a bit cold, maybe. But we see how far we get with that, and we can always continue on the mailing list. Draft status. We have some drafts that have been with the working group for a very long time. And there's a cluster of 4 drafts that discusses credit-based flow control. 3 out of these 4 drafts have undergone transport area review. Some very good comments have been received, also a long time ago. And there's still a discussion going on between David Black, who did the review, and the authors. But the discussion is converging, and there are only a few open issues left, which we will come to a bit later. I've been a bit lax in my task of doing Shepherd write-ups, which would be the next step. I understand I have to follow the new template that was published in July of this year. And I will do that, of course. I may have to get back to the authors on some of the questions, especially on the one on implementation status. I'm not aware of any implementations. But it's one of the questions on the Shepherd write-up template. And then I understand that there's a new thing that drafts in the routing area also have to go through a routing area review, early review. And a question to our AD is if that also applies to these drafts that have been around for some time. I'm not against it, but...
Yes, of course, it applies to everything.
Okay.
So we've been, just so that everyone knows where this is coming from, we've been talking to our chairs about how to improve the overall quality of the documents. And so we've asked everyone, all the chairs and all the working groups, to do a routing director review before requesting publication. You can do that at working group last call or around that. The important thing is that there's one before. And the other thing that we asked already is obviously not for these ones that have been around for a long time, but early assignment of shepherds.
Yeah.
So that we have someone sort of following the document and looking at the issues and whatever before as the document advances. Thanks.
Thank you. So there's this fourth draft in this cluster, which is the Ethernet-based credit extension that has not had transport area review, but it will soon. I talked to David Black today, who has done the other three, and he asked me to indicate when I submit this one for review that he has done the other three and that this one should also end up with him then, and I will do that. Then I think we have to make sure that the few remaining issues with the other three are resolved, and that seems to me then a good point to submit them for routing area review. Because otherwise there might be changes coming in response to the transport area thing. Yes, Lou, go ahead.
My suggestion is go right now. These things are pretty mature. I can't imagine we're going to do a lot of change. If there is a lot of change, I think we're going to have a longer discussion.
Yes, and some of that discussion may be minutes away from now.
Okay.
So one thing that has almost been discussed to death in the working group is whether or not to merge some of these documents. And this was last discussed in the March meeting in Vienna. And the working group decided no, even though the transport area reviewer made a strong suggestion that we should merge several of them, or two of them. The working group's decision was not to do it. And he said, it's fine. Record this decision in the Shepherd's write-up, which I will do. I think the other three major issues and the one minor issues are actually not that major and just require a bit of rewording. And I think we should be able to fix those fairly quickly now. However, at the risk of Lou throwing things at me, I'm going to revisit this merging or not merging thing one more time to remind everybody what this is about. We have 4 drafts. One is specifying 2 new messages, 2 extension messages to DLAP, and 5 data items that go into these various messages. Then there's a traffic classification draft that just specifies a single new data item with 2 sub-data items. And then there is the DLAP DivServ aware credit extension and the DivServ DLAP Ether, or rather IEEE 802.1q extension that are very low on substance because they only define an extension type encapsulated in a lot of boilerplate. And I'm going to propose something now, because the complaint was always about these credit extensions that had only 5 or 6 pages. And I think what we could do is move the sub-data item definitions to these documents. And then the traffic classification document will be totally generic, which means that if we ever decide to define or specify yet another traffic classification mechanism, maybe based on a 5-tuple or 6-tuple or something like that, then this RFC, as it will be by then, never needs to be changed again. And there will be then yet another credit extension draft, which will define its own sub-data item. So that's my proposal, and you can shoot it down. And one of the reasons for shooting it down is that this is very, very, very late in the process, and you may not want to be going this road. But yeah, I'd like to hear your opinion.
Rick Taylor, very quickly, +1 to that proposal, Ronald. I think it makes a great deal of sense. Having base documents as references from other items, just as you say, cuts down on the amount of churn on documents. I think I suggested it some years ago, but it's fine. I think it's a good idea. I know it's late, but let's get it right.
Hi, Lou Berger. I completely agree on getting it right. I just completely disagree on the conclusion. So what happens when we want to do traffic classification on DivServ or Ethernet, and we want to do that independent of credits and flow control? Do we reference flow controlled as their base spec? Let's say I want to do flow classification and do different metrics. You know, do I say, okay, in that document, I have to reference the credit extension? I'm not going to want to do credit extension. I want to do traffic classification. Now, if you want to reduce the number of documents, you can put this in one. If you want to reduce the number of documents, we can rearrange so the top 2 are together. That's easy. But if we think about why we have different documents, it was flow control and traffic classification are 2 fundamental building blocks. So we had those in 2 different documents. And then we wanted to allow for conformance based on our RFC. So those are the reason we have two different bottom documents, is so that if you quoted an RFC, you knew what you were getting.
Mm.
So the tops were building block, the bottom were conformance. We can do this in one document, we can do it in 4, we can do it in 6, we can do it in 3. Let's just decide and move on.
Rick Taylor again.
Yeah.
Lou just made a really convincing argument. I jumped too soon because I had conflated the diff-serve traffic classification and the flow credits all as one thing, and that was a mistake. So I retract my previous statement. There is, and always have been, use cases where being able to describe a flow, but not necessarily because you want to do crediting with it, is a useful property. Having standard ways of describing common flow types, and you use the example of a 5-tuple or a 6-tuple or something, as a flow type that you might want to monitor metrics for, or God forbid, even have some kind of flow up, flow down in the equivalent of a destination up, destination down, means you don't have to touch that because we know what a flow is. So I am reversing my opinion, and I feel no shame.
That's really bad. Yeah, I'm not that convinced that you are ever going to use this classification thing for anything else than the grid-based flow control.
I've had Lou Berger again. I've had some extra documents waiting around, but I sort of frankly didn't want to bring them into the working group if, you know, because this has taken so many years that would use traffic classification separately.
We're going to have to take this to the list, though, because if we're going to stay to the schedule, we don't have the time.
Can we make a call now and stick with it? Please. And frankly, I'll live with whatever you say.
Okay, I wasn't aware that there was more coming. So then we stick with the current arrangement. Is my opinion, but I'm only the chair, and the decision should be the one of the working group.
Can we just make a decision, whatever it is? I'm perfectly fine taking your decision as chair and running with it, whatever it is. I guess we'll look for the answer on the list, and hearing no change, we'll keep it the way it is.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thanks for the time keeping. So the other thing we have to quickly go over is these individual FI-related drafts. There are 3 of them. They were written by Henning Rocke. Nothing has happened with them for a long time. There was a work group adoption call in March on one of the 3, which I thought at the time was the least controversial. There have been some technical comments. Some of them were addressed, not all. But there was no real expression of support or non-support of these drafts. What I propose to do, and what Don already suggested back in March, is to do a adoption call for each of these 3 individual adoption calls quickly, and then I do hope to get some replies. And keep in mind that these are only adoption calls. It's only for the working group to say, we find this interesting and we start working on them. These are not working group last calls. They can have considerable changes while they are working group documents. So I will do that on the list. Next on the agenda is a quick follow-up of the session that we had in Philadelphia, which was a joint session of the Babel, Role, and Manet working groups, where we presented, and the subject was multicast, and we presented to each other what we are doing on multicast to see if there were overlaps or whether we could work together or use each other's ideas. These are only a few of my takeaways. If other people have come away from that meeting with different conclusions or so, then feel free to go to the mic and say something about that. There seemed to be some confusion about duplicate packet detection by the non-Manet participants, who thought that we were just throwing away packets, even if they were genuinely identical packets from the same source. This is not the case. There's always something around these packets that is used as a criterion for duplicate packet detection. And the experimental SMF RFC 6621 in section 6 describes how it works. So for instance, for IPv6, you can use an extension header to distinguish packets from each other. And only if it's a duplicate that is the result of the same packet arriving at the same node again after being retransmitted several times, perhaps, then it's discarded. Henning Rolke gave a presentation on data plane implementation aspects, which was interesting and which I personally would want to work on in my day job. But I don't think there was any protocol action behind that that the IETF is concerned with. And then there were the presentations on beer, which is an interesting multicasting technique that we should explore further to really understand if it's applicable to Manets or not. David Lamparter has begun work on a document on use cases and gap analysis and a sort of problem statement around the use of beer over layer 2 multicast. It's in a very early stage. He did not want to present as yet, but go read it and comment if you can. I haven't really asked him whether he wanted the discussion to take place on the Manet list or on the beer list, but I will. And he is in the session at this moment remotely, so maybe he can comment on that. Another point that was made by Lou and Rick, I think, is that we should, with respect to multicast, we should look further than the Manet alone, but also take into consideration the Manet in its environment with possible one or multiple gateways to the outside world, to infrastructure-based networks, and see how we can handle that. And I think that's a fair point. And it's relatively easy, I think, if you have only one gateway. But if you have multiple gateways, there's always the risk that multicast packets that leave your Manet through one gateway come back via another gateway, and that is something that you would want to prevent. So these are techniques that we could potentially work on under the flag of a new charter. That's coming later. And at this point, I would like to go to the presentation of Sarah.
I just have a question, Ronald, about
Oh, yeah.
your that joint session. Did you guys and the other chairs sort of get together afterwards to see if there was something common that could be done?
No, unfortunately not. No, unfortunately not. We should have done that.
Okay, can you?
And you made a statement at the end of that session that it should not be a one-off and there should be more cross-fertilization. And you were absolutely right, but it did not happen. So
Right. Of course, I was right. I was just saying because and you had that last item there that maybe there might be a charter item for this working group.
Mhm.
Now, that interaction, of course, with the rest of the world,
yeah,
it's sort of obvious in a Ripple network or a Babel network or whatever. So there might be some common things there. Can I give you guys the action to go check with the other chairs and see if there's anything? You don't have to come back with something, but at least, talk.
well, as
Thanks.
I understand, and you know this too, the Babel is concluding.
Yes.
So it would mostly be with roll then.
Sure. Yes. Please. Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Heiner, and I'm going to be presenting on the DTN Management Architecture, or DTNMA. I owe anyone who was in the DTN working group just a session ago an apology for presenting the same slides, but we'll see if we can keep it a little bit different, a little bit interesting. So, next slide, please. So in this presentation, I want to cover some of the highlights of the DTNMA. Definitely not going to try to cover the entire document, but it is posted online. Version 3 is the most up-to-date if you want to look at that. But we'll be talking through the problem space, some considerations that we had from existing network management protocols, and then talk through the reference and autonomy model. So as a really quick introduction to the DTNMA, we originally called it the AMA, that's the Asynchronous Management Architecture, but we decided that asynchronous was not the right word to describe the problem space that we were working in. So for now, sticking with the DTNMA instead. And at a really high level summary, the DTNMA is looking to address 3 key points. So this management architecture has to work in a scenario where a managed and managing device are not always connected. They're dealing with asynchronous behavior. We need an autonomy model of sorts to enable self-management of those managed devices. And then we need to use compact encodings, which is enabled by the naming structures that we've chosen to address some of the constraints in that network. Next slide. So one of the first sections that we added to this document was in an effort to define our problem space better. So we acknowledge that a DTN can be considered a constrained network, which is why we need to make sure that the encodings that we are using are efficient. And a DTN is also a challenged network, so experiencing issues like disruptions and delays, which is where the focus on autonomy and handling asynchronous behavior comes from. Next slide. After we established that problem space, we wanted to take a look at the work that had already been done in this area and see what we could learn from, what we could draw from, and how that could be incorporated into the DTNMA. So as we looked at some of the existing approaches, we saw both lessons learned to bring in and gaps that we felt needed to be filled by the DTNMA. So for example, when we took a look at SNMP and NetConf, it was appreciated that that is a well-structured approach, but it requires the establishment of a low latency session, which is something that we can't guarantee when operating in a DTN. Similar to RESTConf, we appreciate that that is stateless, but it requires the use of HTTPS and typically some large data transfers to move data stores. And that's also not something that we can expect to always be able to support in a DTN. And then third point to address here is we took a look at CoreConf, which uses CBOR to enable more efficient encodings, but was still missing some of the pieces that we were looking for. So on the next slide, please. So I tried to put a visualization of those points into this slide. And obviously that's a lot of information to distill into 3 circles. So don't take this as a complete representation of the problem space, but trying to figure out a way to show how the DTNMA fits into these 3 different areas that are a priority for that management architecture. So at the top, we're prioritizing autonomy. We need to support asynchronous behavior, and then we also need efficient encodings. And there's existing work in all of these circles, but we could not find an approach that addressed that intersection, which is where the DTNMA fits. Next slide, please. So one of the first major updates that we made to the document was to address the DTNMA reference model. On the left, you'll see our original AMA model, but it was very generic in describing the autonomy that we required for this network management approach. And because that's one of the focuses of the DTNMA, it was important to update the model and show how we're taking advantage of the use of an autonomy engine at the managed device and policy, which is created and passed over by the managing device to inform autonomy. Next slide, please.
Yep.
And we will get into these figures a little bit larger after this slide. So we will slow down and talk to those details soon. But in the reference model, there are 3 main points that I want to address because they're all important in enabling device self-management, which is something that we need if we can't count on a connection between the managing and managed device. First is the use of pre-shared definitions. So in the moments where these devices are connected, we want to take advantage of that and make sure that we are sharing the data and models that are needed so that there's an agreed upon definition of the data that is being pulled, that is reacted to, and what those reactions should look like. Second is the notion of self-management, which is happening for the agent, which is residing on that managed device. So again, an acknowledgement that that managed device is often disconnected and we need some sort of local autonomy to react to the occurrence of events, but we need those reactions to be consistent and based off of information that's provided by the managing device. And then the third component that's represented here is the use of command-based management. So because we can't support bulk updates and the use of large data stores like you might with a NetConf approach, we're instead using a command and control interface to allow that managing device to get information to the managed device to include the policy statements that are configuring that autonomy engine. Next slide. So now getting into the details of this reference model, we're going to start at the bottom, which are the pre-shared definitions. So again, this is occurring in a challenged environment. The real-time data negotiation that you would need to maintain large data stores is not a guarantee. So instead, we are taking advantage of when the managing and managed device can speak to each other to update an autonomy model, ADMs, which are application data models. Those contain agreed upon data definitions and are something that we can standardize so that that can be shared across the network. And then also runtime data stores. Next slide. And then speaking to the managing device, we'll start at the top with the applications and services that live on the managing device. These are the source for policy statements, and they're also the target of the managed devices reports, information that is coming back. And those applications and services may have an operator in the loop, but they also may not. Next slide. However, the information is coming from those application and services. One of the key pieces of information is the policy statements, which are then received by the DTNMA manager. That policy is then encoded and sent to the DTNMA agent to act on. So we are translating policy into a standard expression that can be understood. And in addition to being that interface between those applications and services on the managing device, the manager is also receiving reports back from the managed devices that map to it, and then is distributing that information to the requesting applications and services. And then we've also included some administrative configuration that has to live here. So keeping track of, for example, mapping to different managed devices. Next slide. There are also applications and services that reside at the managed device. Actually, in the last iteration of this presentation, it was pointed out that it would be helpful to know that these are not the same applications and services that are at the managing device. These applications and services are being monitored by the agent. These are what are managed. And they contain state information that is sampled. Their configuration can be changed by the DTNMA agent, and their behavior can also be influenced by the DTNMA agent, all through the use of controls. And then finally getting into the actual agent residing on the managed device. So the agent is responsible for carrying out monitoring and control. And the compelling piece of that is it needs to do that without a regular connection back to the managing device. So the agent itself is able to determine what state it needs to pull and when. And part of that is driven by the internal autonomy model. So there are rules that populate that autonomy engine that tell the DTNMA agent what pieces of state information it should be monitoring and how it should react to changes in state. The agent is also responsible for data fusion, so creating new data or reports to then be sent back to the managing device. And then again, some administrative points here, like maintaining mappings back to the managers. Slide. The last part that I want to address here is the DTNMA autonomy model. So this is what is allowing the manager to provide policy to the DTNMA agent, and the agent to act on that policy to be able to manage itself when it's not connected to that manager. So at the top of this model, you'll see that the manager is providing policy expressions to the agent to populate a local rule database. So those rules are saying, if this stimulus event occurs, respond in this standard way. Next slide. So then getting into those responses that can be carried out as the DTNMA agent is receiving data from those applications that it is managing, the autonomy engine is reacting to events. And that could look like sending a control to that application to influence its state or configuration in some way. The autonomy engine might also instruct the agent to instead generate a report and send that back to the manager. And it can also influence the runtime data store, which can be updated as well by the DTNMA manager with additional data definitions when connectivity is established. So with that, I know that I ran through all of that really quickly. So if there are any clarifying questions.
Hi, Lou Berger. I'm just trying to understand the relationship between what you presented and what you had earlier. And you talked about COAP or COMI, whatever you want to call it, CoreConf, ResConf, Anima. And then you went into this, and then you, so ResConf and CoreConf are ways to transport Yang models, basically, to encode and transport Yang models. Is what you're talking about here is an alternate way to encode and transport Yang models, or something completely different?
Completely different in that we can't, in the environment of this constrained and challenged network, we haven't seen how we could support the use of a Yang module for the configuration and control of data. So looking for an alternative that is not using necessarily that schema, so that we can address the intersection of those three circles.
Yang is a way of modeling information and to some degree also modeling transactions related to that information. ResConf, CoreConf, NetConf are ways of sort of transporting it. It seems to me that you need a new way of transporting to handle your disconnected operation, but you don't necessarily need a new language for modeling of management information.
No, absolutely agreed. I misunderstood, but yes,
Okay.
definitely.
Well, I'm sure I wasn't clear.
I agree that we should be looking at what can we pull from what is existing that we can incorporate.
Okay.
Something that we're looking at in representing this data is we want it to be hierarchical in nature. We want to make sure that we're considering the efficiency of the encoding to make sure that we're not creating something that's so large that it doesn't have a chance of making it to that managed device.
Okay, well, when you talk about policy, there's a lot of Yang models that are looking already at policy. So there just might be work you can build on. And keep in mind, Yang is not about encoding. It is not about transport. It's about modeling the information. And then you can encode it as appropriate using the most efficient, again, CoreConf, or the least efficient, whichever one you think is. I personally don't like XML, but that's my bias. It'd be good to leverage that other work and add to it by adding encoding and transport as necessary. And maybe you don't even need a new encoding. Maybe you only need a new transport. Thank you.
Ed?
Ed Borain. So I just wanted to come in and sort of agree with what Sarah was saying and also what Lou was saying in that part of the interest in the work is trying to suss out what is the useful autonomy model that should exist on a perhaps very resource constrained device that has to manage itself in a challenged environment. And that set of behaviors, variables, data models, that language is probably a subset of all that could be modeled in Yang, but also that there is some sort of useful local constructs, and I'll use the word loosely, that we have added, which we'll call part of our syntactic sugar, to help reduce, round trips, that even though Yang is separate from an underlying transport, although at the time, when it was created, it was kind of focused on netconf, there are some things that you can represent by adding additional parameters or additional metadata if you were to construct those models. If you have a standard definition of your autonomy data model, and then you represent that in a Yang module, you can do that, and we have people who have done that. And we also have folks who have done netconf to DTNMA bridges and shown how you can go back and forth between Yang models and other representations of it. So just a few comments.
Just one comment from me to one of the early slides of your presentation is that I consider most manets also constrained and challenged.
Definitely applicable across different areas, and that's something that we certainly found even in just using the word asynchronous initially to describe our management architecture is we ought to not limit where we can apply things. Always best to seek the largest audience. So, thank you.
And thanks very much for your presentation.
We only have 13 minutes left.
And I've got one remaining slide. So we probably will have to continue this on the mailing list anyway. I think we as chairs received an email from Alvaro maybe 2 months back or something about the fact that we were okay, to get straight to the point, there was some talk about Babel closing down, and I think there was an idea within the Babel working group to do any remaining work that there might be from within the Manet group. And unfortunately, I did not respond at that time. There was first, I was aware that this was coming, and then this also reached Alvaro, and he said something like, "Now the cat is out of the bag. Let's discuss this, and then let's also think about rechartering." So I started thinking about what we could do. I looked at the current charter. Most of you are familiar with what's in there. There's some OLSR maintenance that we're supposed to do. There's DLAP, which was done. DLAP flow control, which is hopefully almost, especially the credit-based variety of that, is almost done. Then there was a DLAP traffic classification statistics, which made me wonder what it was. But now I think that it may be one of these things that Lou or Don maybe have planned for as a follow-up to and as an additional use of the traffic classification draft or RFC if it becomes that. Multicast we of course addressed in the joint session with Roll and Babel. Or no, sorry, let me rephrase it. multicast protocol framework and multicast FIP was on the current charter. Nothing much happened on that so far. And particularly implementing a FIP is interesting, but again, I don't see any protocol development action behind this. We could think about defining an API or yeah. It is not immediately obvious to me what we should do there, but if anybody has some ideas, then I would like to hear that. And then there is the infamous documenting challenges, best practices for deploying and managing manets. The managing manets, yeah, I think that DTM-MA, as just presented, could play a role there. Oh, sorry, what did I do? Why is my slide deck gone?
Sorry.
Yeah, did you read?
Well, I think I was trying to remove you from the queue. And you were
Oh, okay. Let's. Sorry for that. So these best practices for deploying, I don't think you will ever get that information, but yeah. So that has been on the charter since the last recharter in 2016, and nothing much has happened there. So if we are going to recharter, yeah, first of all, there's the question: is there anybody who still has energy to work on anything in this working group? I know I would want to work on multicast. But Alvaro, do you want to say something now?
Sure, a little bit on rolling. So just some general comments. One is that I think the working group is relatively mature in some cases. So what I would like to see is, for example, it says there all SR32 maintenance, similar statements for DLAP. So instead of listing the 10 next extensions or the 3 next extensions that we're going to have, leave it up to DLAP maintenance and extension, period. That's it, right? Yeah. That way we don't need to be recharting every 3 months or anything like that. OLSR, DLAP, the sort of thought about Babel for me is that, it's a shame that if the working group closes and there are enhancements to the protocol, I see Julius on the line there, that there might be not a place to work on it. By default in the routing area, RTGWG takes everything that doesn't have a home, right? Yeah, the RTGWG chairs are here. But in this case, I feel that there's probably better expertise or closer expertise to Babel. I honestly don't know how many of you participated in the Babel working group, but ideally, and again, I see Julius on the queue there, they would come here too, right? Especially if there is something else that needs to be worked. So that way we give it a home, right? So not necessarily, the same as with OLSRv2, kind of listing there, Babel maintenance type thing. And the other comment that I have is DTNMA. I really don't want to see a DTNMA for Manet. What I want to see is what's in the charter of the DTN working group, which is DTNMA where they work with us, or in other words, we work with them, right? So the wording there should be, yes, we're going to work on maintenance and we're going to leverage and collaborate with the DTN working group on their DTMA framework, or whatever you copy whatever the DTN charter already says. That, I guess, at a high level, right? Those are the maintenance and the specific management item that we already have work on, right? And then, sure, we need to figure out what, if anything, we're going to do with multicast. We're probably not going to get that document on deployment, but we'll see what happens when we take the charter to the AESG. If people want to keep it in there, or what do we do? What I would then want to do is, and of course you're the chairs, you do whatever you want, but what I would do is, given that we're going to have a new charter with new energy, try and focus the work, right, and get the work moving. We've been revisiting these DLAP drafts forever.
Yeah.
Not that when they fall into my queue it would be faster, but still, we need to get stuff out. So let's try and find a way. We can talk offline later on how to move the work forward. So just general comments. Thanks.
Yeah. Abdul Salam, we have only 5 minutes left. Can you be very brief? Because I would really like to hear what Julius has to say.
Okay. It's regarding the routing protocol, the multicast. I think still there is room for or rechartering. We mentioned this. The multicast routing is important for this group, and we haven't discussed much about multicast or ad hoc multicast. Thank you.
Yes, and if you have any ideas on this, please post them on the mailing list. Julius?
Hi. Yeah, just a few words. I really wish that Donald were here. So what I'm going to say is my opinion and not necessarily the opinion of the chairs.
He is here.
He is
Yeah,
here.
I'm here.
Okay, do you allow me to speak?
Certainly. Yeah, I enjoy your speaking. Go right ahead.
Go. Okay, my feeling is that we're pretty done with Babel. The plan with Babel was to standardize Babel and a few important extensions and to close the working group 3 years ago. We ended up doing a lot of fun stuff over the last 3 years, but that was unplanned. And I think it is time to close the working group. Now, all the registries in Babel are specification required, so we don't strictly need a working group if we want to do any further extensions to Babel. However, there is a feeling, and Donald will correct me if I'm wrong, that it might be more convenient in some places if there were a working group where we could publish Babel, future Babel work. And MANET is a friendly group with people who have all the right competence to judge, to review Babel drafts. And that is why I would like the charter to add something like Babel maintenance so that we can have a place to publish drafts and RFCs in the future. Thank you.
Rick, very quickly.
My app has crashed completely. I can't click the button anymore. Very quick question, really kind of to the chairs and the AD. What's happening with AODV v2? I'm not making a political statement here.
No, I have the answer to that. So you guys remember last time we rechartered this thing? Charlie asked me to AD sponsor AODV2. So I started reviewing. I'm still waiting for updates. And so basically, Charlie hasn't had time to work on it. It's still in my queue. That doesn't mean that I'll keep it in my queue forever. I'm about to just give up because we've been working on it for 3 or 4 years and we're still not done.
I don't believe his co-authors have heard about it either for about 2 years. So,
and then there's a thing called AODV Ripple, which is different, I guess. We have 1 minute left.
Yeah, be very brief. Just Donnelly's like again. Just say there is one document I'm about to request publication for in Babel, and there is an expired draft that a number of people in Babel would like to see published. But it doesn't really matter whether the Babel working group exists as a separate working group for any of this. So I think I'd welcome having a Babel maintenance item in the MANET charter, and forge ahead.
Yes, thank you. the reason that I was still mulling over my response to that was that I was afraid that Manet would also be going the way of the dodo soon, and then would still end up in routing area working group. Okay, we're officially out of time now. So thanks everyone for your contributions.
Just one thing, to avoid Manet going the way of the dodo, we need work, right? So we need to come to the meetings, get the work done, push the drafts out, all that stuff.
Fully understood, and you're absolutely right. And with that, meeting adjourned.